When you think of Emily Dickinson, what comes to mind? Mystery, precision, surprise, short, electric lines that feel dark, playful, defiant, and deeply introspective. Her poems are unconventional, thought-provoking, sometimes even a little blasphemous. And yes, somehow still a bit cute. The Poet of Paradox. Emily Dickinson is often introduced as America's most enigmatic recluse, a woman who declined the world's invitations and built an entire universe in a small upstairs room. A childhood friend once said, "Emily was not beautiful, yet she had great beauties, her eyes a lovely auburn." And her literary mentor, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, confessed after meeting her, "I never was with anyone who drained my nerve power so much." Imagine radiating that much voltage without ever leaving your house. If you study Dickinson, you need two tools, your voice and a dictionary. Her poems are meant to be heard, read them slowly, aloud, with that lexicon close at hand. In 1862, she wrote to Higginson, "For several years, my lexicon was my only companion." That line tells you everything. She loved precision, but she also loved to test its limits. Dickinson adored words, their roots, their double meanings, their strange, elastic possibilities. Her playful mastery of language lies at the heart of her art. And, above all, Dickinson's poems are brief but detonating, which is exactly what makes them so powerful. Dickinson was unusually well-educated for a 19th-century woman. Amherst Academy, a year at Mount Holyoke. She studied mathematics, rhetoric, philosophy, Latin, a full classical education. She also played piano, baked, and tended her garden. She enjoyed what were then considered feminine activities like cooking or gardening, but she wasn't trapped by them. The Dickinson women shared housework, her mother, her sister Lavinia, and part-time help, so Emily could spend her afternoons upstairs, writing. The Dickinsons weren't wealthy, but they were respected. Old New England stock. Her grandfather founded Amherst College. Her father, Edward, was a stern but devoted lawyer. And for Emily, solitude was essential. For most people, freedom means travel, adventure, expansion. For Dickinson, freedom meant enclosure, the locked door, her declaration of independence. Isolation for her wasn't oppression, but release. In that upstairs room, she wrote thousands of drafts, sewing them into small booklets called fascicles. Over her lifetime, she composed nearly 1,800 poems, yet only 7 were published while she was alive. After her death, her family discovered the enormous archive hidden in her room. Everyone knew she wrote poems, but no one realized she'd written a universe. Before she died, she told her sister Lavinia to burn them. Lavinia didn't. Thank you, Lavinia. And apologies, Emily. Lavinia enlisted Mabel Loomis Todd, her brother Austin's lover, to help publish them. Their efforts led to Dickinson's first posthumous collection in 1890. In 1870, Dickinson wrote to Higginson, "If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire can warm me. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry." For Dickinson, poetry wasn't about rhyme or metre. It was about impact, that visceral jolt that proved art was alive. What sets Dickinson apart is that, despite reading widely, she imitated no one. No borrowed vocabulary, no fashionable style. Her voice was unmistakably her own. She wrote lyric poetry, condensed moments of consciousness, not stories or scenes. Dickinson was a poet of paradox, intellectually exact, yet wildly free. Her work can sound bold, even masculine, yet it hums with playfulness. Her introspection runs deep, but it always comes with a twist. Her poems often begin midstream, in medias res, and end without closure, leaving us suspended in wonder or unease. That openness is part of their magic. Formerly, she was radical. Those dashes, erratic capitals, abrupt line breaks, all deliberate. Her use of slant rhyme and enjambment gives her poems their strange, breathing rhythm. Dickinson loved structure, and her use of hymn metre reflects that. While most poets of her time wrote in grand iambic pentameter, she chose the humbler rhythm of hymns. In 19th century New England, hymn singing was part of daily life, in churches, at home, everywhere. Its steady beat shaped her ear. It's the same rhythm as Amazing Grace. In fact, you can sing almost any of her poems to that tune. But Dickinson was no conventional Christian poet. She took that sacred form and filled it with doubt, irony, and spiritual tension. In her hands, the hymn becomes a paradox, a prayer and a rebellion at once, truth and circumference. Dickinson was never a poet of social protest or politics. Her world was inward, concerned less with public life than with the deep existential questions: life, death, the soul, faith, and the nature of truth itself. She believed in truth, absolutely, but not in simple ways. On July 2nd, 1862, she wrote to her mentor, Higginson, "My business is circumference." That strange, beautiful phrase defines her entire artistic method. She never charged straight toward truth. She circled around it. For her, truth had to be approached slantwise, from the edges, through language and intuition. Later she wrote, "The Bible dealt with the center, not with the circumference." The Bible speaks from certainty, from the center, while she preferred to dwell in the margins, where revelation comes quietly. This idea of circumference runs through her writing style. Her poems are elliptical, full of gaps, pauses, and silences. She leaves space for what can't be said, trusting that the unsaid sometimes tells more truth than words ever could. Her biographer Richard Sewall described her perfectly. She avoided specifics, dodged direct confrontations, reserved commitments. She told the truth, or an approximation of it, so metaphorically that nearly 100 years after her death, scholars still grope for certainties. For Dickinson, clarity was overrated. She preferred ambiguity, that shimmering edge where truth flickers in and out of reach. Her poem Tell All the Truth But Tell It Slant captures this vision. It's only 8 lines long, but it holds her entire philosophy. Truth, she says, must be told, but slant. Direct truth is too blinding, too powerful. Like lightning, it has to strike from an angle. Success in circuit lies. That single word, circuit, suggests her circular way of thinking, that understanding doesn't come through confrontation, but through orbit. When she writes, "Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise," we sense her awe and her warning. Truth divine and radiant can overwhelm the human mind. One critic, Lisa Holloway Attaway, calls this her circular language. Dickinson's refusal of straight lines, of fixed patriarchal logic, becomes a form of quiet rebellion. She keeps power in orbit, never letting it harden into hierarchy. At the same time, Dickinson wasn't a political feminist. She didn't march, organise, or join any suffrage movements. But her solitude itself was radical. As Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar point out, her deliberate withdrawal was its own act of resistance. She rejected marriage, domestic duty, and public life, yet her poems quietly pulse with a feminist consciousness, exploring female interiority, desire, isolation, and choice. And while she turned away from society, she turned towards science. Educated at Amherst Academy, she had a real grasp of the scientific thinking of her time: geology, botany, astronomy, and the newly published Origin of Species by Darwin. But even science couldn't give her the whole picture. Beneath her fascination with the natural world was a hunger for what lay beyond it, for mystery, for transcendence. Death and Dickinson. At 15, she wrote to her friend Abaya Root, "I am continually putting off becoming a Christian. Does not eternity appear dreadful to you? I cannot imagine my own death scene." 2 years later, she confessed, "It is hard for me to give up the world." Death became her lifelong companion, one of her most haunting themes. More than 600 of her poems grapple with it. To us, that might seem morbid, but in the 19th century, death was intimate, part of daily life. Funerals happened at home. Children died young. Women died in childbirth. Tuberculosis claimed loved ones with frightening regularity. Dickinson herself lost 12 cousins before adolescence. She grew up surrounded by mourning, yet she faced death with almost scientific curiosity, as if trying to measure its mystery. Her New England was also in the throes of religious revival, the late wave of the Second Great Awakening. Her family were devoted Protestants, faith was everywhere, but Dickinson never fully joined them. Where others found salvation through God, she sought transcendence through language. She often used words like heaven and heavenly, but her heaven wasn't sentimental. It was strange, sometimes cold, always questioning. She owned nearly 20 Bibles and filled her poems with scriptural echoes, but she never formally joined the church. She refused to sign conversion pledges, left Mount Holyoke because she couldn't believe, and remained the only member of her immediate family who never became a Christian. Her poems often feel haunted, not by God's presence, but by his silence. One of her most famous pieces, "I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died," captures this perfectly. Written in 1863 during the Civil War, it takes the clean rhythm of a hymn and fills it with disturbance. The dying speaker describes the stillness before death, like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. Family and friends wait quietly, expecting divine arrival. For that last onset, when the king be witnessed in the room. But instead of God, there's a fly. Blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz. The sacred moment collapses into the ordinary. The poem ends not in light, but in blindness. And then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. No vision of heaven, no revelation, only silence and decay. By replacing the divine with the trivial, Dickinson subverts the entire Christian script of death as transcendence. The king never comes, the fly reigns instead. Is it a symbol of God's absence, or just the body's decay? Dickinson leaves the question open. She doesn't tell us what to believe. She makes us feel the uncertainty keeping the question alive. The Great Recluse. Emily Dickinson is often remembered as one of literature's great recluses. She spent most of her life inside her family home, the homestead, in Amherst, choosing stillness over society, solitude over spectacle. Her world was small, a few rooms, a garden, her writing desk. But within that narrow space, she built an entire universe. When her niece Mattie once visited her upstairs, Dickinson locked the door and said, "Mattie, here's freedom." For her, freedom meant protection, the right to close the door and keep her mind her own. Solitude was not punishment. It was privilege. Her withdrawal from the public world was not an accident. It was a philosophy. To be left alone, to think without interruption, to preserve one's inner life. That was Dickinson's rebellion. She once wrote to Higginson, "Publication is the auction of the mind." That line tells us everything. She saw publication as a kind of intellectual compromise, selling the purity of thought for attention. For her, writing was sacred. The world, full of chatter and commerce, was not to be trusted with something so intimate. Her poem, "I'm Nobody, Who Are You?" captures that tension between anonymity and fame, and her delight in being unseen. It begins, "I'm nobody, who are you?" At first, it sounds like a joke, playful, a bit mischievous, but the idea behind it is deeply serious. Dickinson celebrates the state of being a nobody. To be somebody, she suggests, is dreary, like being a frog croaking your name all day to an admiring bog. The frog, of course, stands in for the public self, loud, repetitive, and desperate for attention. And the bog? The audience, vaguely impressed, mostly indifferent. Dickinson is laughing at fame itself. She's saying, I'd rather be nobody and free than somebody and trapped. The quiet connection between two nobodies, poet and reader, was, to her, more real than any public applause. Some critics, like Sharon Cameron, say Dickinson's poems are circular, that she rewrote the same feelings over and over: grief, wonder, loss, solitude. Others, like Barbara Mossberg, call her the eternal child. And critic David Porter observed that her poetry hardly changed over 20 years. She didn't evolve towards something else. Her art, like her life, never moved in a straight line. It circled, endlessly and inwardly, around what it means to be alive, alone, and awake. In the end, Dickinson didn't need the world's stage. She found infinity in a small upstairs room and eternity in the space between two dashes. She lived as if to prove her own line. The brain is wider than the sky.